Thanks and welcome to today's event, where we'll be looking at the Edexcel Pearson Paper 4 writing for the 2024 exam. So what you are now teaching your Year 10s. My name is Carol Hughes. I've been an Edexcel trainer for some 9 years now, and involved particularly in German, but also in general MFL writing and presenting. So what are our goals today? Well, our goals today are to support you in your teaching of this new Edexcel Pearson Paper 4. Whether you're new to Edexcel or joining us from another board, or whether you're new to Edexcel, joining us from another board, or whether you are an existing Edexcel user. And by the end of the session, we hope you will have a better understanding of what students are required to do and how the paper is marked. This training will be followed up by further sessions where you'll be able to participate in marking tasks. So first of all, could I ask you to participate in our poll so that I can get to know the delegates joining me today online? Now, the first two questions will be answered in the poll, and the third question and the fourth question, or the third question, is what is your key reason for attending the session, should be answered in the chat box. So, Edleen, could you bring up the poll, please? Okay, so we have our first question as to which examination board you currently use. And then the second question, which languages do you teach? And you can tick all that are applicable. Okay, so I can see that most of you are with Edexcel. We do have a few AQA delegates and also somebody teaching in one of the other exam boards. And we have a mixture of French, German and Spanish. So as I say, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results with you so you can just see. So as I said, most of you are with Edexcel, but we also have a mixture of all three languages. And this presentation is designed for all the languages using the new exam. So I will stop sharing. And as I said, if in the chat box, you could actually put in what it is you hope to gain from today's session. So what is your key reason for attending? Okay, I can see teaching and assessing it, marking it. And yes, I can see that somebody there said, and I thought that might be the case, that you're with AQA for year 11, but are switching to Edexcel for year 10. So it's very much to get a better understanding of the marking, applying the mark scheme and the differences. Okay, I can see it flashing again, time on time again on my screen, and that's one of the things we will be looking at today. So as I say, we will be looking at the structure of the paper, understanding how to apply the Edexcel Pearson mark scheme, understanding its terminology, and also, because it's nice to go away with some teaching ideas or we be reminded of some teaching ideas, to explore some ideas for teaching and learning to support your writing, and finally, to learn about the ongoing support. And we just seem to have, clicked ahead. That's fine. Right, I'm just going to stop my video because you can then concentrate on the screen. So the slide we're going to look at now gives an overview of the new writing paper and the tasks for foundation and higher students. Now, the layout of the paper is such that students first complete all of the writing tasks before moving on to the translation, so they can concentrate on that writing skill first. The target grades for this paper are 1 to 5 at foundation tier and 4 to 9 at higher tier. So there is an overlap of the 4 to 5 grades over the two tiers. And in the translation, Edexcel Pearson will aim to keep to the lower end of the word count, and the translations will be thematically linked. The total of number of marks for each tier are the same, 50 marks. And there is no grammar section, as in the AQA writing for the new specification. The student's ability to use the grammar in the written language is assessed through the written tasks. And you can see also the overlap of question 1 higher and question 3 foundation. Now, if you've attended one of our GTTR events, Getting Ready to Teach events, GRTT events, you may have seen the next screen where we will be looking at some of the key points. So students are expected to produce texts to express ideas and opinions for different purposes and in different situations. But all of the context for the exam will be appropriate to students' own experiences. The question set will not expect students to use their imagination, and care has been taken to ensure that all the questions are inclusive. So, when, for example, a question asks what they did with their family, it will also include the option of friends. When students were asked, they felt that the bullet points gave them a useful starting point, so that the 4 bullet points have been retained for the overlap question which is foundation question 3, higher question 1, and for higher question 2. They've also been retained for the foundation question 2, but been reduced to 3 bullet points rather than 4, given that students only have to write 40 to 50 words. Now, these bullet points give students clear scaffolding for their answer. And as in the current examinations, they also give clear indications as regards the timeframes which are required to meet the requirements of each bullet point. The difference is the bullet points are now in English, and there is no requirement for students to follow the bullet points in order, although it's often helpful for the examiners if they, for example, use a fresh paragraph for each bullet point. I can see one question there, and I'm just going to answer it. Is choice of writing tasks for both open questions or just the longer one? There is a choice of writing tasks for all questions except for question 1, foundation. Now, some of these questions are formal and some are informal. And when students are expected to respond to a formal, because there is one formal question they have to respond to and one informal question, there is no requirement for students to use the formal register in their response to the question. And we'll see that later on as we look at the questions. Where there is a question of choice, and I've just mentioned it's all the questions except foundation question 1, each question will be based on a different subject, so students can choose the content where they feel more confident. Now, all the questions can be completed using the vocabulary and the grammar on the specified vocabulary lists and grammar lists. But students may also use vocabulary which is not on the specified list to complete the task. So, for an example, if they happen to be talking about pets and they had a guinea pig and guinea pig is not on the specified list, they can still use the word guinea pig if they know it. But they are not given any additional credit for using words outside the vocabulary lists. But it does give those students who have the knowledge the freedom to express themselves as they might wish. So taking my example, They don't have to say, I've got a dog, because that is on the vocabulary list. It's just a very simple example. But as I said, there is no additional credit if they're using words outside the vocabulary lists. Somebody has asked what happens if they answer both choices for the 20 marker. Well, the first answer that they have written will be the one that I expect would be marked. So again, I think it's something we train our students to do, not to answer both questions, to make sure it says A or B and they only answer one or the other. So that was the general overview. And we're going to now start by looking at foundation question 1. So in foundation question 1, the first question of this paper, it retained the colour photo as is currently used, but the task requirement has now changed, as students are required to write 4 short sentences about the picture. This will be the format that is familiar to those who previously delivered the AQA specification, but is a change from that previously used in the current Edexcel specification, so the one your Year 11s are taking. Now, this is foundation question 1, so students are being assessed on their ability to describe what they can see. They do need to write in full sentences using a verb, but they are only required to use the present tense. The assessment mark is 2 marks per sentence for a sentence that fully communicates relevant information about the picture. 1 mark where there is ambiguity, and the marks are for communication only, with no marks being awarded or deducted for grammar. So we have here, for example, the 3 pictures from the sample specifications for French, German, and Spanish. So we've got now an example. As I said, the assessment is 2 relevant information, so it must be something that can be seen on the picture, clearly communicated, has to be in a sentence or clause, so it needs a verb. 1 mark if it's partially communicated, but still with a verb, because it's in a sentence or clause. And 0 if it's not rewardable, so it's not understandable, or, for example, if it's not applicable to that picture. So, as we said, students produce sentences describing the picture, and that mark grid is applied to each individual sentence. And students are awarded marks for clear communication and relevance to the picture. As it's targeted at entry-level grade 1, and it's about giving the weaker students the chance to get some marks by being able to state some vocabulary and use simple verbs, it's quite acceptable for all the sentences to start with the same phrase. For example, if it was French, il y a, or je vois, for example. Now, we have here a French example of the assessment. We've got 4 possible answers. And I would just like you, and I'll take just until I see about 20 people putting their marks up there. I would like you to suggest how many marks you would have awarded for each sentence. So in the group chat, if you think all the marks are going to be awarded 2, just write 2, 2, 2, 2. If you think they're 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, just put them in the mark scheme. I said in the mark scheme, in the group chat I meant. Okay, we've had lots of you answering. We have had a 0, I saw there. We have had some 2s and 1s. Okay, the marks awarded would be 2, 2, 0, and 2. And if I explain, 2, The first sentence, it doesn't matter that the adjective is in the wrong place or that that is absolutely fine. We're not marking, remember, grammar. We're just marking communication. It communicates. The second sentence, 2 marks, because yes, there's a dad there, missing the accent, but again, that's okay. It still communicates, even if the accent is missing. The third sentence has been given naught because I just say it had to be relevant to the picture. And while there might be lots of grass there and a sea in the background, there isn't a tree that can be seen. So relevant to the picture. And the last sentence still communicates in the first clause. Remember, it's a sentence or a clause. So we have a clause that communicates there, il y a 5 personnes. And the fact that the rest of that sentence doesn't communicate anything is ignored. So they have 2, 2, 0, 2. So this is the foundation tier for assessment. So in this guidance, and you will find this guidance and the guidance available for each of the languages in the delegate booklet that I hope you've downloaded. And in the guidance, you can see examples of these sentences and further sentences and how they would score against the mark scheme. As I said, minor errors of incorrect gender, incorrect accents, minor spelling errors do not impede communication of what the student is writing and therefore gain 2 marks. I've mentioned the sentence je vois un arbre, there's no tree, so it's irrelevant. And the last example, the 2 marks still awarded as part of the sentence is correct. I can see I've got to come. Thank you, Lisa. I can see you said that makes sense. That's good. It is only the first clause that is marked. I think we went back with a query on this, and I believe the answer was that it's a clause or sentence. Therefore, if this second part of the clause of the sentence, the second clause in the sentence was correct, that would also gain the 2 marks. These are foundation students, obviously, so we're looking to reward them as much as possible. So where we do need to be aware is if there is an incomplete or irrelevant verb or no verb, as in you can see some of the examples with naught, then ambiguity can be created. And this is where sentences might score 1 mark, as in le père content, because there's no verb there, or naught mark, no marks, if, for example, just content is written, because there is no mark there. So verbs are very much key. The sentence or the clause needs to have a verb. So with that in mind, I just wanted to move on to some teaching and learning activities which you could find useful for doing with not just foundation students, but really any students. The first one is the one palm. Now, there are many teaching and learning activities which could be used to practice this question. There's 6 examples here. They are also in the back of your delegate booklet, which accompanies this training. So as I said, the first one, PALM, is an acronym that many of you will be familiar with. People, action, location, mood. It very much came to the fore when we introduced the picture description in the speaking exam of what is currently running for our year 11. And equally, it is going to be useful here for students, preparing them for the picture-based task. Because the 4 sentences could follow that acronym. So they write je vois or il y a so many people, what the people are doing, the action, where the people are, and then something with an adjective for a mood or something about the weather. That's one way. As I said, they could be simply sentences all starting with il y a or je vois as well. But the palm sort of focuses the students on what they could write, so they're not thinking, oh, I don't know what to write. Supporting students in writing accurate sentences. Oh, apologies, we moved back. No, I've moved forward. I touched something on my screen. Right. Supporting students in writing accurate sentences, teachers could give sentences about a picture where the students need to rearrange the words. Then, having completed that initial task, the sentences could be then used as a model for students to write further sentences, either about the same picture or about a different picture. Now, I said that verbs play a key role in scoring 2 marks for the sentences. So teachers could give sentences with the infinitive form of the verb, and students have to correctly conjugate the verb, or with the verb in brackets. Many of you will have used the spot the difference type of activities with pictures, and using those that just adds another variety to the repertoire of tasks we might use with students. Now, the last 2 tasks, true or false or which picture, I'm going to demonstrate with this. The sentences here are in English because I realise we've French, German and Spanish speakers. But for true or false, this is an example of how you might use this. So again, we're providing scaffolding for students. We're giving them sentences about either one or more pictures, and they can either state if the sentence is true or false according to the picture, or they could be which sentence do they apply to. So for our first sentence, for example, there are 2 adults and 2 children. Students could then say, well, that's picture A. So could they then adapt that sentence, having been given it, to write there are 2 adults and 3 children for picture C? So we're just helping them all the time, our lowest level students, to adapt sentences. So we're building up their familiarity with the sentences they could write. And you might have noticed we've actually followed the palm here, the people, action, location, and mood. Now, if you have any other activities you found successful when preparing this type of task, I would actually like you to share them in the webinar chat with other members of the group. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. I don't think we've got it. Yes, thank you. We have got something. Yes, spot the difference. Liz has mentioned. Okay, we haven't got any other ideas coming up at the moment. Can I just mention, if you do see any ideas which other delegates share with you in the group chat and you think, oh, that's a useful idea, please do jot it down. I do try and say what I read there, so it'll be on the audio, but the group chat isn't shared afterwards. So we've got draw the picture based on the description, use photos as a starter activity and give them time to note down as many nouns as possible, and describing clothes and features. And all these are applicable to describing our pictures for this task. Okay, so that was our foundation task 1. And let's move on to the open-ended writing tasks. Starting with the foundation. And as I mentioned, there is a choice of tasks. And somebody said, was that for all the questions? And for all the open-ended questions, yes. So if we look in more detail at these foundation open-ended questions, as mentioned, where there is a choice of task, they will have two different subject matters, but the task requirements will be the same. So here, for example, we've got the French Foundation paper question 2. And again, this will be found in your delegate booklet. And students can choose to write a review about a cafe or a review about a mobile phone. The 3 bullet points require similar tasks: a description, an opinion, and a reference to the future. Now, if you look on the right of the screen, you'll see foundation question 3, which remembers our overlap with higher question 1. And again, this time students write to a friend about shopping or transport. And again, if you look, the task requirements are similar: a description, an opinion, but this time with reasons, a reference to the past, and finally, a reference to the future. Now, for those of you who are new to Edexcel, the structure will always be the same, so students are aware of what to expect. So description, opinion, future for question 2, description, opinion with reason, past and future for question 3. So you can also see from these examples how the demand of the questions has been ramped up from question 2 to question 3 by including reasons for the opinion and the past tense in foundation question 3. Now, if we look at similarly at the higher paper, you can see the same pattern. So at high level, we have the same framework. We've just looked at question 1 because it was our crossover question. And here in your delegate, and again, this is in the delegate booklet. And in question 2, the students can choose to write about healthy living or schools for an online magazine. The bullet point requirements are now a description, the pros and cons of the subject matter, a past tense, and a future reference. Again, non-Edexcel centres may be unused to this format, but it's going to remain the same, even though the subject content will change. And once again, excuse me, you can see how the questions are ramped, with opinions being included with reasons in question 1, to in question 2, the pros and cons of the subject matter. So let's go back to that foundation question 2. I've just been asked if there is a title. I would actually have to go back to the specification to look. I haven't got the specification here at the moment. All I've done is taken the questions. So I think if you go back to the specification, if you want to find if there is a title. So as I said, let's go back to foundation tier question 2. If we look at more detail at this question, it is the first of the 2 open-ended tasks foundation students will undertake. And we've mentioned that there is this choice of tasks. So they can choose, are they more confident writing about a cafe, or are they more confident writing about a mobile phone? But the requirement is the same, it's a review. Now, I mentioned earlier on that they will write one question will be in a formal context and one informal. And this is the formal context because it is writing for a public website rather than writing to friends or family. But students will not have to use the formal register to answer this question. So they don't ever need to use the formal you form when they are doing their answer. We've said this is now the 40 to 50 word question. So there are only 3 bullet points and they are now in English. Unlike currently, where there are 4 bullet points in the target language for the year, what the year 11s will be doing. Again, I've mentioned already that they're giving a description, opinion, and using a future time frame. And if you have looked at the AQA, this is different from the current AQA, where the task can be completed in the present tense. Now, there is clear information about the number of words students are expected to write. If a student were to write more words, then all the work will be marked. But the full range of marks are accessible with the 40 to 50 words. And it's important that students do not write too much, as that can lead to a lack of focus and a greater number of errors, which can adversely affect the mark awarded. If they write too little, it may mean they do not meet the requirements of the task. And this is the same for all the open-ended written tasks at foundation and higher. Now, the task is going to be assessed with 9 marks for AO2, response to the stimulus, and 5 marks for AO3, linguistic knowledge and accuracy. And we'll look at the assessment criteria now in more detail. Right, I'm coming back to the future time frame. Okay, I'll just leave that with me, and I'll come back to the future. So I've mentioned. Okay, all those points. So the future time frame. This was going to be our next point. When it says a future, credit is given to any reference to the future. It doesn't necessarily have to be a future tense. So we're going to have a quick task. And again, I would like you to write in the group chat, and you can either use target languages or English, any other ways in which you encourage your students to refer to the future. Now, this is relevant for all the questions requiring a future tense, which is everything. So again, and if you see something in your chat box and think, oh, I didn't think of using that, please note it down. I can see I want to there. I'm going to come back to that one in a moment. You've got lots of ideas there that you've shared. Thank you. I'm going to put some up on the screen now. So we could use present tense with a future time adverb. So this is what German frequently does, as does English. So at the weekend, I'm going to the cinema. Am Wochenende gehe ich ins Kino. That's a very common way in German of expressing the future. You could use intend to plus a future time adverb. Plan to, which somebody has mentioned. Hope to. I have decided to. I would like to. I want to. Now, in German, we do have to be a little bit careful because I want to is ich will, which looks very much like I will. So encourage your students to put in that future time adverb. Ich will morgen ins Kino gehen. Because we want the examiner to realize they know they are using I want to for the future rather than I will in English. Going to, which very much French and Spanish use an awful lot for going to do something. So we had lots of ideas there, and you will get a copy of this presentation sent afterwards if it's not already there in your downloads. So lots of ideas of how you could refer to the future. And as I said, that is applicable to all the questions where there has to be a future reference. So let's move on to the assessment. Now, there are, following research with customers, the new mark grids have been significantly improved with greater clarity and clearer language. And you'll find these in your delegate booklet on page 8. And in the paper for writing guide, which is available on the website, and again, it's in the download booklet on page 21, you will find a helpful infographic, which we'll refer to later on, which differentiates the terms used within the mark grid, and also exemplifications of applying the mark grid. So looking at the assessment criteria for this task, there are 3 key features assessed in the response: coverage of the bullet points, development of the bullet points, and comprehension of what the student has written. Now, with the examiner's mark, they start at the top of the grid when applying the marks. So they'll start with the 7 to 9 mark grid and think, to what extent has the student met the assessment requirements? Have all 3 bullet points been addressed? Is there development of ideas? Is most of the response comprehensible, even though some messages may be unclear? So the mark scheme provides clarity as to how many marks can be awarded according to how many bullet points have been addressed. So if a student has only answered 1 bullet point, their mark is going to be capped at 1 to 3. If they have answered all 3 bullet points, they can access the full range of marks. But to be placed in that 7 to 9 category box, they must also have met the other requirements of that box. So what about development of ideas? Well, the examiner is also looking for the development of each bullet point. Has the student added extra details? And we'll be taking a closer look at that in a moment. If a student has, for example, addressed all 3 bullet points, but they have not developed these points by adding further details, and the message is not always clear, so the examiner is often struggling to comprehend the message that the student is communicating, it may be more appropriate for a 4 to 6 mark to be awarded. So the coverage, what I want to stress is that the coverage of the 3 bullet points does not automatically mean a student is in the 7 to 9 box if the other requirements have not been met. And finally, comprehension. When considering the mark for comprehension, the examiner will consider how easy it is to understand the message the student is conveying when reading the task as a whole. The linguistic or grammatical errors are accounted for in the AO3 grid and should therefore be disregarded when assessing the response to the stimulus in the AO2 grid. The whole task is marked holistically, and the mark of naught will only be awarded if nothing in the task meets the requirement of the question. For example, if the student is asked to write a review of a cafe as here, and they write about something totally unrelated, and the examiners will always try and find some relevance between what the student has written and the question set. So, for our example we've got, what about this development of ideas? If we take the question we have here, so bullet point 1, where the cafe is, and the student has written, the cafe is in town, the Café dans la ville, for example. Thinking that this is a foundation student, How would you encourage them to add further details? As I say, we're talking about foundation students. Perhaps you could get some ideas, add some ideas again in our chat box. Oh, apologies, as to how you would get your students to add further details. Okay, so we've got next to, near, using prepositions. Add adjectives to describe the cafe. What else is in the centre of the town? Description of the food or the cafe. How you can get there. What they do there. The name of the cafe. These are all great ideas because we're talking about foundation students. And we've got some examples here which really go from foundation right up to higher on our next slide. So we've got it. Le café est dans la ville, devant la poste. Le café est petit. I'm not going to read them all. I'm just going to bring them up on the screen because we only have an hour and a half for today's session. And you can see there we're describing the food. So talking about the food. We've even just, in this one, we've just added an extra adverb, très. And then we've got our final sentence, which is perhaps more akin to what a higher student might write, where we've got, and you can see at the end of each sentence is exactly how many words each sentence, each of the examples includes. We've got a number of sentences. So they don't have to have connectives in there. Our last sentence does. It can just be a connective with a, it can be just be an additional phrase, or it can just be another sentence. And you've shared lots of other ideas that you've had there. So we've talked about future references. We've talked about development of ideas. We've talked about the number of words. So let's go back to our foundation question 2 and now look at our second assessment grid, AO3. And again, we have 3 key features being assessed in the response. So this is the grid that's applied to linguistic knowledge and accuracy. It is applied completely separate from the AO2 grid. And the only time that the 2 marks must be the same is if the AO2 grid was capped at 0 because the student has written nothing relevant in their response to the task set. And then they would be awarded 0 in the AO3 grid. However, as I said, examiners will try and find something relevant. And once something relevant is found, then this opens up the full AO3 grid mark scheme for the student's response. So again, as I said, there are 3 key features that we're assessing. The variety of language, which includes both vocabulary and phrases, the variety of grammatical structures, including the use of conjunctions, and the accuracy of the language. So what do we mean when we talk about a variety of language? Well, variety refers to the range of vocabulary and structures as listed in the specification for, here, foundation tier. But students can use any grammatical vocabulary, any grammatical structures of vocabulary outside the lists, but they're not going to be awarded any additional credit for doing so. So we're not restricting them, but we're not giving them additional credit. The foundation, the use of grammatical structures, well, this is foundation. So the examiner is only expecting simple grammatical structures. The task does require the use of two time frames, present and the reference to the future, as we've just discussed. And when considering the two mark grids, the student may have developed their ideas when addressing the bullet points, but done so with lots of simple, short sentences. So if they've only used simple, repetitive language to do so, they could have scored in the top grid for AO2, but they might score in either the 1 to 2 grid or the 3 to 4 grid for AO3. If there is no variety of language and very short, simple sentences, then probably we're looking more at the 1 to 2 grid. So as I said, they are applied totally separately. Now, the third strand of the assessment is accuracy. And with the accuracy, there is further, the examiner will consider how accurate the language is and the sort of errors made by the student, and whether they are major or minor errors. So, for example, you have, and again, this is in for all languages in the delegate booklet as well as in the specification material, you have the exemplification of errors. And there is further examples of what we considered major and minor errors, which can be found in the SAMs for each language. So we have the French example here on the screen. If you want to find it in your delegate booklet, it's pages 17 to 19 for all the different languages. And it shows which errors are minor, so they don't hinder the meaning being understood of what the candidate has written, and what sort of errors are major errors, which prevent that meaning being communicated. And again, this is applicable to all open-ended tasks, both foundation and higher tier. You will find the exemplification and further tasks which have been exemplified in the download booklet and show the mark scheme being applied. And this is something when we move on to language specific, our second aspect of the training, which will come up at a later date, where you'll be working with your own language. Now I can see I've got some questions there. So before I move on, I'm just going to pick up those. If the pupils repeat the same vocabulary too often, would this affect marks for development? Did they only credit less common vocabulary in AO3? No, because if you looked back in AO2, I'm just going to scroll back, if you can bear with me. Oh, sorry, it's a long way back. Okay. No, it is the AO3. Apologies. Yeah. We are looking for the variety of vocabulary there being in the AO3 grid. So, sorry, we've gone one too far now. Can I just clarify if something relevant is found in an answer, the entire piece can be marked for AO3? No, the entire piece is going to be marked for AO3. Well, no, sorry, I'm going to reword that. Everything that is deemed to be relevant will be marked for AO3, but it will enable the candidate to access the whole, or the examiner to access the whole of the AO3 grid. Right. So I think I thought my sound has gone, but apparently it's not. It's just one person. Okay. Yeah, the whole of the AO3 grid is applicable to what the candidate has written that is relevant. Okay, so I hope that's clarified that. Okay, let's move on then to our overlap question, which is question 3 in the foundation tier and question 1 in the higher tier. Now, this question has 4 bullet points. And in line with Edexcel's policy to increase the challenge, we've already seen that students are now going to have to not only give an opinion, but also to justify it to meet bullet point 2 requirements. In addition, they're going to need to use a past tense to address bullet point 3. Bullet point 4 refers to a future plan, but as I mentioned previously, we can use anything that refers to a future time frame for the language that they're writing in. And as I said very early on, but just reiterate in case you've forgotten, the bullet points are always going to follow the same pattern, so the students are aware of what is required for each bullet point. This time, we're expecting students to write 80 to 90 words, and as stated previously, students should be discouraged from exceeding the word count, as both too few or too many words can be self-penalizing. The bullet points clearly indicate the requirements, and in both options, the task format is the same, but the subject matter is changing. So again, the students can choose which they choose to answer about, 3A or 3B. And I know somebody said earlier on, what happens if they answer both questions? Well, again, it's quite clear there, choose either question 3A or 3B. So it's training students to only answer one of the questions. And this time there are 13 marks for AO2 and 5 marks for AO3. So the assessment grid, again, is following the same pattern. The clarity of assessment grid that we saw on the foundation questionnaire has been maintained with the same 3 foci as in AO2. And again, you'll find that on page 12 in your delegate booklet. AO2 clearly indicates the allocation of marks as to how many bullet points have been addressed, to what extent the student has gone to develop their ideas when addressing those bullet points, and the comprehension of the message for the reader. And when talking about frequent development of ideas, we're not necessarily referring to every bullet point being developed to the same extent. They may have developed one bullet point more than one of the others. Now, I mentioned earlier the infographic, and that's up on the screen now alongside the assessment grid. And it gives an indication as to the relative relationship between the terms being used in the assessment grid. So, for example, consistently indicates, as the infographic shows, that the features happen throughout most of the task, whereas sometimes the feature that's been considered only happens in about half the task. So each of those terms needs to be considered in the context, so that frequent development of ideas is a positive feature, but frequent errors would be obviously a negative feature. And in the AO3 grid, what are the examiners looking for? Well, they're now looking for extended sentences, and in the top band, complex language, but again, within the confines of the vocabulary and grammar listed for the appropriate tier. Also being assessed is the candidate's ability to use 3 time frames, as well as the accuracy of the language. Now, thinking about extended sentences, we'd already looked at development of ideas for a foundation candidate. Well, extended sentences can be achieved in several ways. And again, perhaps we could use the chat box to consider how a higher student might extend a sentence. If we take the sentence, I do sport, ich mache Sport, je fais du Sport, Could you please write some ideas in a chat box as to how you would encourage your higher students to extend the sentences? And again, you can either use the target language or English to meet that IO3 AO3 requirement. Right, everything's scrolling up quite fast. Justified opinions and reasons are there as a separate category. So they're there anyway. I can just, okay, so I've seen the time, I've seen who do we do, putting negatives in, when they started the sport, where, who with, when. Okay, somebody's put some other ideas in there using depuis, so how long you've been doing it, subordinate clauses. Opinions are there anyway, so, don't just think of an opinion as extending this when I do sport. Adverbs of frequency, yeah. And I think I did see a question up at the top there, which I'm just scrolling back through my chat box. Do you need variety for the complex structures, or would it be the same one every time? It's some variety. So using the same one, again, if you think of our infographic, which we had on our previous screen, if they use the same complex structures every time, that's not actually going to meet, that's going to be limited variety. Occasional variety is a bit more, and some variety was about half the task. So every time, same thing every time isn't going to work out. Okay, now Gabriella's there written there. Every other day I do sport with my younger brother, my best friend in my rear garden. However, my older sister hates it because she thinks it's too noisy. That is a definite. I think our grade 9 student or top grade student there, extending the sentences. So some of the things, okay, you've got lots of ideas there. I came up with some things like you have done, who you do it with my friends, perhaps adding a connective. I often play sport with my friends, although I don't like athletics because I can't run fast. So we've got a negative in there. And the idea is really, rather than just developing, we're now extending using complex language as required in the AO3 grid. And as I said, we do have our AO3 infographic. So as I mentioned, somebody said about the same connectives each time. Well, we've got some variety of vocabulary is 5. So we're looking, you can see just over half of it. So we're looking a lot more at some than, for example, limited. And that infographic can hopefully help you. So generally successful use of timeframes doesn't mean that all the timeframes are accurate to achieve a mark in the top grid, but it would be expected that about half the verb used would be successful to achieve a mark of 3 to 4, where the examiner is looking for some successful use of timeframes. Okay. So moving on to our higher tier question 2, turning to the second question on the higher tier paper, and this can be found in your delegate booklet, pages 13 to 14, you can see again that we have the same format that students are becoming familiar with, so they know what's expected. Okay, just excuse me a moment. Okay, the blog is again a formal setting. Our previous question was informal, writing to friends and family. So we now have the formal setting, a blog. It doesn't require students to use a formal register. The subject matter changes between the two questions, but the context remains the same. The 4 bullet points, again, clearly target 3 tenses, with an opinion and justification seen in question 1 on the higher tier, now replaced with the increased demand as students have to write about pros and cons of the subject matter in bullet point 2. These bullet points, as I said, will always be in the same order. So for AQA, people who previously taught AQA aren't used to this predictability. This is the way it is done with Edexcel. Now, students also have to narrate, explain, and express future plans or actions. They're expected to write between 130 and 150 words with the same caveats on longer or shorter answers as we've mentioned previously. And this time we have 17 marks for AO2 and 5 marks for AO3. So we have here our assessment grid. And you can see when looking at the assessment grids, and they're in your delegate booklet on page 14, we've used the same format for AO2 regarding assessing the coverage of the bullet points, the development of ideas, and the comprehension of the student's response. But there is now 17 marks available. What has changed is the use of terminology. So in the top grid, whereas in the overlap question, examiners were looking for frequent development of ideas, they are now looking for consistent development of ideas. And again, that infographic can support our understanding of what the terminology means. It's not a tick list. We're not looking for, how many connectors have been used? Tick, 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 tick. It's a holistic approach to the student's answer. And in assessing the response, the examiners are now looking for the answer to be easily comprehensible, with rarely any points where the message is not immediately clear. Now, the wording of the other boxes in the grid, 11, 13, 8 to 10, etc., remain identical to those of question 1 for question 1 higher for the AO2 grid. So we just have this new assessment grid at the top, 14 to 17, and what the candidates are looking for there. And I can see there, if there is an informal and a formal task and pupils aren't required to use the formal you verbs, what are they expected to do differently between the two? For example, will idiomatic language be penalised? Idiomatic language won't be penalised. It is the requirement that was put on the exam board that there has to be a formal and an informal question. It's unlikely that some forms of idiomatic language will fit in the formal question because it's just not applicable to be used. So it's not penalising, it's all the time. Don't think of penalising students. The only time they're really going to be penalised if nothing is relevant. We're rewarding students all the time for what they produce. Okay, if I turn to the AO3 grid, now the wording here of the AO3 grid, which is still only worth 5 marks, does differ from that question 1. So if we look at the top grid, 4 to 5, to award full marks, examiners are now looking for a wide variety of vocabulary and structures and frequent extended sentences and complex language. So again, if you have that infographic in your mind or have it in your delegate booklet in front of you, you can see how these terms are relevant. Now, what about this term complex? What examiners looking for when they're looking for complex language? They're looking for students to demonstrate their ability to use the more complex grammatical structures, but listed in the grammar list, such as pronoun use before the verb, impersonal verbs, a range of connectives, different negatives, etc. We're not looking for them to use things outside direct objects, yes, not looking for them to use things outside that grammatical list. So as teachers, you might find it useful to refer to the grammar listed under higher tier in the specification for further examples. The language is now expected to be consistently accurate and any errors to be minor. So again, think about going back to that exemplification grid. There is no automatic overlap with the AO3 grid for question 1. It's the terminology that is key. And with each grid, it is important to find the best fit. So I'll give you an example. A piece of work with a wide variety of vocabulary and grammatical structures, which uses frequent extended sentences, but only has occasional complex language, with some success in using time frames, but occasional major errors, wouldn't fit into the 4 to 5 box. But assessing that whole task holistically, it would fit comfortably in the 2 to 3 box. So what I was doing there was picking out various features and finding the best fit box. And that is how the examiners assess. And we just have those items highlighted to show you. So in the delegate booklet, pages 21 to 3, you can see examples of how the mark scheme is applied. And you have some further guidance on pages 16 to 20 and exemplification of tasks. And all of that will support you. A lot of you said you wanted to understand the assessment. A lot of this will support you in understanding and applying the mark schemes. And as said, there will be further training, which will be language specific. So, what about some teaching and learning activities? If you have some good activities that you use with your higher students, please write them in the chat box as the webinar chat as I speak. We have done training before on writing, and the activities I've mentioned here have been shared in previous trainings that we could use, and they could be used to with your students for the new GCSE as well. So, forbidden words. Selecting words or phrases that pupils are not allowed to use in a piece of writing. It could be words or phrases you could say they're not allowed to use them for the entire week in anything they do. Improving the sentences. Giving a set of simple sentences. It's a nice starter activity, this. And asking pupils to improve the sentences. You could support them by giving them some suggested words or phrases in a box that they could use to improve those sentences, or you could just let them work as individuals or as pairs or even as groups to see who can come up with the best sentence. The sentences could also be laminated or on cardboard strips, so that if you have general sentence, they could be used for different activities and different topics that you're covering. Improve my paragraph. This can be something where you give simple paragraphs to the class on large pieces of paper. The class can be divided into groups, and they have so many minutes to make improvements to the paragraph, but then actually pass their paragraph on to the next group who looks at it, tries to find any errors and sees can they add anything else to it. They've got peer support to enhance their work. And tick list. Before actually giving students an exercise to do, a writing task to do, You could give them a list of complex language or grammatical structures that you would like to see. You could even add some competition by giving each structure a value and see which of the pupils uses the structure, and the pupil with using the most complex structures and the higher values then wins. And recognizing the basics, that students highlight repetitive language. So you give them a piece of work and they look at it and they highlight repetitive vocabulary and structures in the piece of writing and suggest improvements. Okay, so those are some examples. I've had another question there, I think, which was, what would happen if they had one major error? Well, if again, you look at that infographic, there is room at the top for saying that it's not totally free of errors. So one major error is not necessarily going to take them out of that top grid, but it will also depend on what else they've done, what else is there. So you've got 3 strands to look at. If all the other 2 strands are firmly in that top 5 and one is not in the 5, then the best fit is that top box. It's looking all the time for the best fit. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left of our training, and I want to move on to translation now. So at foundation level, all the sentences, whether it's a paragraph or whether it's sentences, are thematically linked, unlike AQA. There is a clear layout for both tiers with an increase in length and complexity throughout the task. At least one sentence will be a third person sentence, with the other sentences being in the first person using both singular and plural forms. So you can see in our example here, this is a German example. A and B are third person, Germany is, there are, and then C, D, and E are in the first person, we, I. At foundation, the majority of sentences will be translated using the present tense. And whilst there will be one past tense sentence, as in our final bullet point here, last year I saw a big castle. And while it's very unlikely that the past tense sentence would appear in one of the first, well, apologies, let me say that again. Whilst it is very likely that the past tense sentence would appear in either sentence D or sentence E, it is not necessarily always going to be sentence E. Okay, the past tense ramps up the demand, so it is either going to be in one of those last 2 sentences, D or E. So, thematically linked, increasing in length and complexity, at least one third person sentence, and one past tense, either D or E. And for our higher tier translation, and here we have the Spanish, again, all the sentences are thematically linked. They increase in length and grammar complexity. There are both first and third person singular and plural form sentences. And the higher passage requires students to use at least 2 sentences, the present and the past. They may, however, include a future tense if it is necessary for the coherence of the task. And the same caveat applies as we mentioned previously. If there is a future sentence, it can be translated using any appropriate future time frame for that language. So just to review, thematically linked, increasing in length and complexity. Now we have both first and third person, will be at least 2 time frames. There may also be a future, which can be translated using any appropriate way that language translates the future. And what about assessment? Well, the translation is marked holistically, and this differs from the current GCSE at foundation level, so the Year 11 GCSE. The response to the stimulus grid AO2 assesses how appropriate the meaning of the original language is transferred, and any appropriate wording is rewarded. The AO3, linguistic knowledge and accuracy, assesses the accuracy of the target language. And there is an overlap between the foundation and higher tiers, as shown on this slide and also on the next slide where we have the higher. So we can see that the AO2 descriptors, the descriptor marks for 1 to 2 at higher tier, maps to the descriptor marks for 3 to 4 on foundation tier, and achieving top marks at higher tier requires greater consistency than achieving top marks at foundation tier. And with the AO3 descriptors, the descriptors for marks 3, 2, and 1 at higher tier map to the descriptor marks for 4, 3, and 2, respectively, at foundation tier. So what about some of the features of our translation? It's always the last question, so the students can concentrate on the writing skills first. It's always focusing on one thematic area. All the words are from listed vocabulary, so whether it's foundation for foundation tier or higher for higher tier. It's a holistic mark scheme, which is more favourable and is used for both foundation and higher tier. It has less focus on accuracy than using an individual mark scheme of each sentences. And again, you will find the exemplification of the mark scheme a useful starting point for looking further at the application of the translation mark grids. There are further examples and commentaries which can be found in the delegate booklet. So we've looked predominantly at the writing, and I just mention the sport. This was written, I should say, prior to the summer term and before you started teaching. So obviously all 3 languages are now accredited. There are a number of areas which can be accessible from the web pages, teaching and learning materials, the paper 4 writing guides, and the SAMs, and you'll find links from the presentation to that. Obviously each of the language pages are set out the same way. The SAMs also includes examples of the tasks, together with examiner feedback on the assessment of the tasks. And again, I hope you've been able to download the material from today's presentation, our download booklet. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to do so after today's event. I've got another question there. And in fact, our next slide is any further questions. So, right, what happens if the students use the near future instead of the simple future tense? Now, I'm not sure the person who's asked that question, if that's a particular language issue that's going to refer to your language. But remember, it's marked holistically. Okay. And it says, somebody's come back and saying, according to new specs, that would be acceptable. I can't see any issue in that to say, unless there is a specific issue with Spanish, for example. I couldn't see any issue in French or German. Oh, if the students had, for example, theme one in question one, then theme three in question two, will the translation be linked to the theme that wasn't covered in the other questions? Not necessarily, no, no. How do we download the booklets? Can I ask, Adeline has already put there how you can download the booklet again. So it's there if you follow that link. Are there any other questions? Yes, I'm just thinking about that question you asked. It doesn't mean it's not like the speaking where you are covering all the different topic areas. Okay, the writing isn't. Okay, I'm glad it's been useful, Jess. Where can you find the list of grammar points to cover, please? There, if you go to the specification, they're the appendices at the back of the specification. That's where you can find the list of vocabulary. And I think there's something new come out recently. Do sign up for information from Edexcel, because there was something new that came into my inbox. I haven't had a chance to explore it, about the vocabulary recently as well. I think, oh, somebody's explaining what's, sorry, uh, right. Okay, are there any more questions I'm looking for? Will there be there are trainings be developed all the time. So I know there is plans to have trainings for speaking as well. How would how would near-native speakers would be assessed if they write phonetically? Well, it's not going to be the same spelling, so they would actually end up, depending on what was phonetically spelled and how much, they could end up being penalized, even if they're native speakers. I'm glad it's been useful, supportive. Uh, as any more questions there? I'll keep looking back to see if there's any more questions and just move on. That was our goals today. I hope you have got a better understanding of the structure and applying the mark scheme, and also the key terminology. Right. And we've explored some ideas, and even if you knew them before, maybe they've sort of something that you hadn't thought of before. And the ongoing support, please do sign up. Somebody said, how do we get updates? Okay. The subject experts are experts. Again, there is a link here. So it says, find the subject advisor for your area here. Sign up to receive regular updates from your subject advisor on qualification news and support of your subject. So if you follow those links, that's how you can get updates about training. If you also go on to the Edexcel Pearson website, there are training, there's information there about training. Oh, thank you. Somebody said all goals met today. Okay, so thank you for your time today. That was the other page I wanted to mention, the Professional Development Academy. So the person who asked, how do you find about further training? Follow that link, the Professional Development Academy, put in languages, and then you can find out further trainings that are coming up. So thank you for your time today. Please provide feedback on the event via the survey that's automatically sent to you following the event. And I look forward to meeting you at a further training, and I will hand you back now to Edeline to finish the session.